Mr. Mayor, we've reached 6:30. We have all members present. You may begin.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this planning committee meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores and welcome everybody this evening, all members of the committee and everyone who's watching us on the live stream this evening. We're glad that you're with us. So the second item on the agenda is additions, deletions, amendments. We don't have any of those. The third item is disclosures of pecuniary interest. I'll ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. We have no minutes to adopt this evening, so we're right on to public meetings, and we do have one public meeting this evening, and it's 5.1 S 2020-001, L 2020-009, and Z 2020-014 for 15 Market Street Corporation to do with the Market Street development. And so this is a public meeting, and I'll just take us through the process for a public meeting here so that everyone who's watching knows how this is going to go. We'll begin the meeting with a presentation by our planner, following which we will open the public meeting, and that will start with a presentation or comments by the applicant or their representative. And after that, we'll bring in the members of the public who have signed up to speak to the application. We have 17 members of the public who've asked to speak to this particular application this evening. And then we'll conclude the meeting with questions or comments from members of council. Just to let everybody know, council will not be making any decision on this file this evening. The reason for this evening's meeting is to hear from members of the public, and what we hear will inform what comes back to council at a subsequent meeting for a decision. So with that, we'll start the meeting with a presentation from our planner, Daniel Kingsbury. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members of council and members of the public. Thank you for being here. I'll just here just a second. Like it's up and going, so hopefully that as the mayor indicated, this is 3 application types: a plan, a subdivision.
Hey Dan, Daniel, we're having some difficulty with your connection.
A zoning bylaw amendment on behalf of.
Can you hear me there, Dan? We're having some trouble with your connection.
Okay. My apologies. And let me just try something here.
Mr. Mayor, can Linda or Tracy put up his presentation? His internet isn't that good, and by doing both, it's drowning him out. So can we share the presentation?
Well, that's possible.
Yeah. I've got it ready, Mr. Mayor, if that's easier.
Sure. Well, let's see. Dan, can you hear me there? Or did he drop off? Oh, there he is.
Okay, my apologies.
We hear you real good there now, Dan. Maybe if Jay's now sharing the presentation, maybe we can do it that way and get through. See, let's give that a shot.
Yeah, certainly. My apologies for that. I did switch networks, but I think it's in a little better shape now.
Okay.
If Jay could advance to the first slide, and I'll just start the presentation again. Because I'm not sure where I dropped out there. So this is an application for a plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment on behalf of the applicant, 15 Market Street Corporation, for the lands which have become known as the Market Street subdivision lands, with essentially at the corner of Getty Street and Market Street. So the lands are 4.2 hectares in area. They're largely wooded right now. And Jay has the site context slide up. So you can see the uses are vacant, surrounded by residential uses and recreational uses, namely Nodwell Park to the east being the recreational use. They're serviceable by water and sewer. And as mentioned, there's access from both Market Street and Getty's, as we'll see later on in the development concept. If you could advance that, please, Jay, to the next slide. And so the purpose of the applications are essentially the plan of subdivision is proposing a 12 lot single detached lot plan of subdivision, as well as 2 apartment blocks, and those are essentially big lots. And on those 2 apartment blocks are 4 apartment buildings proposed with 150 units between them. And there's also a one main block that is proposed to be dedicated to the town for stormwater management purposes, trails, and conservation purposes. The official plan amendment relates to a special policy that's applicable to the lands. It's a policy related to woodlands, and that policy essentially says that woodlands in this area of town that are greater than 4 hectares in size are considered significant. And so currently no development is permitted in significant woodlands of 4 hectares or greater in this area of town. So again, we'll get into that in a little greater detail, but that's essentially what the official plan amendment's for. And the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone the lands to what was originally thought as to residential 2, but after some confirmation by the applicant and a review of a recent town zoning bylaw amendment, it would appear the single detached lots meet the R1 zone provisions. And so those 12 lots would be zoned R1 essentially. So that's this slide deck is a little out of date. And then there's portions of the land that would be zoned open space, and the apartment blocks would be zoned R4. And there's a special provision for one of the apartment blocks to allow reduced frontage. And if you could advance the slide, please, Jay. So here's a little context in terms of what the local official plan designates the lands as, and so they're designated residential in the local official plan. And open space, a tiny portion is designated open space up on top of the plateau near Nodwell Park. And as mentioned, there is what could be considered an overlay policy. It's not a designation, but there is that woodlands policy framework, which I'll get into in a little greater detail shortly. The lands are currently zoned planned development, open space, and residential 1. So the property itself has a bit of a history. I understand it was a portion of it was part of a rail spur, and also contained the town's former sewage water treatment plant. So when those uses ceased on the lands, it's likely they moved into a planned development zone. And what that planned development zone is typically used for is to hold large parcels of land in a bit of a holding pattern by prohibiting really any sort of development until those lands are developed comprehensively in a comprehensive manner, as is proposed with this subdivision proposal. And so I'm not sure, I think there is maybe a slide missing here, but I did mention the zoning. If could advance the slide deck, please, Jay. Yeah, essentially the zoning would be R1 for the 12, so it'd be rezoned from planned development to R1 for the proposed single detached lots at front Getty Street and Market Street, and R4 for the apartment blocks that you see there, sort of in the middle. And then between the two apartment blocks, there's a wooded area, small dots, not sure if they're showing up, but that's part of the tree retention plan. And so the tree retention plan is proposing that 33% of the existing woodland feature would remain intact as woodland, and those lands would be then dedicated to the town for conservation and stormwater management purposes. And if you could advance the slide, please, Jay. And so, so there's a number of issues, and I would encourage anyone listening to go to the agenda, tonight's agenda, or the county's planning department website and review the town of Saugeen Shores planning applications, where you'll see the staff report for tonight, as well as other information that was submitted in support of this application. And that report details a number of issues that planning staff are looking at in regards to this application, including significant woodlands, significant wildlife habitat, natural hazards on the land, the efficient use of land and resources, housing and affordability, traffic, stormwater management, and archaeology. And so the town's official plan and county official plan all contain policy directions in these areas. And for brevity, I won't get into the fine details of each of these areas. They can be found within the staff report. And there have been a number of review agencies that have reviewed this application as well for issues particular to them, including the SVCA. And so the SVCA has provided comments that essentially state that they're in agreement in principle with the concept, subject to a number of conditions, including the completion of a final servicing and stormwater management report, erosion and sediment control plan, and a tree preservation plan. They've also, I know this was one of the comments that came up in the open house, are seeking clarification on the number of seeps. And seeps are a water feature or hydrology feature on the lands, the embankment that formed the former glacial Lake Algonquin. And so the SVCA is looking for confirmation as part of, as a condition of approval. So the way the conditions work, and this is for the sake of everyone listening as well, members of the public, if this is approved as a subdivision, it is draft approved, and it's draft approved subject to a number of conditions. And before any development can occur on the lands, those conditions have to be satisfied and cleared. And so a number of agencies would be responsible for clearing those conditions, including the SVCA, the town, and the county. And so the SVCA has provided comments, including proposed conditions that they would like to see as conditions of draft approval for this. We have yet to receive conditions from the town. They're still reviewing the application and drafting proposed conditions that they'll provide prior to the next meeting on this application. Saugeen Ojibwe Nation is actively reviewing the application. Again, there are a number of comments received in regards to the archaeological resources in this area. And so we've reached out to confirm with Saugeen Ojibwe Nation that they are aware of the application. They have been circulated and they are reviewing the application. And so we would come back to town council once we receive comments from them in regards to archaeology. And then the Blue Water District School Board has requested certain conditions related to offers of sale, indicating that the school board may not be able to guarantee a particular school or busing option. And if you could advance it. So we did receive a number of comments, and just as a bit of a administrative detail, comments received up until around midday today were forwarded to council, consolidated and forwarded to council. So the report that was provided that's on the agenda includes comments received up until Thursday, and those received between Thursday and midday today have been forwarded to council, and those received after midday will be forwarded subsequent to this meeting to council again, and will be included in the next planning report. So there are some consistent themes throughout the comments received, including concerns related to impacts to significant woodlands and the tree retention on the property, traffic and pedestrian concerns, loss of wildlife habitat, character and compatibility issues with the proposed subdivision, and stormwater management. And so a good chunk of those comments have been included with the planning report that council is receiving tonight. If you could advance the slide. This is essentially the conclusion of the presentation. As mentioned, there's more detail in the report and online where a lot of the technical details regarding the plan can be found. And so this information is to be received for information, and we will return to council at a later date to consider the public comments that have been received. There's been a number of questions that have been raised, and so we'll be coming back to council with answers to some of those questions and addressing those concerns prior to making a recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So we'll open up the public portion of our meeting, and it will begin with a presentation from the proponent or their representative. I'll just note before we get started, we do have to hear from several people this evening. We have a long list of people who are lined up wanting to speak to us. And so I would just ask everybody, beginning with the applicant, to keep your comments focused and make sure not to be repetitive. Council has received an awful lot of written correspondence on this, which is great. That's a great way for council to receive correspondence because it allows a person to give us lots of detail and we can review it. So if folks can be concise and recognize that we want to make sure we get everybody heard in a timely fashion, that would be much appreciated. So we'll begin now with the representative of the applicant, and I see Mr. Davidson.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Yeah, I'm very aware of the time constraints. I have my presentation at about 8 or 9 minutes, so I won't be holding things up. So I think everybody knows I'm Ron Davidson. I helped with the open house we had last week. With me on the line is Randy Von Haking and Brett Nodwell. They're both owners of the property, or they form part of the ownership group. If there's any questions directed their way, they'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, they don't intend on saying too much or anything. John Slocum, the civil engineer, and John Morton, the wildlife expert, are both on the line as well. Same thing. They won't be making any comments unless they're asked a question. So last week we had a good open house. I thought it was a great opportunity to listen to what members of the public had to say. There was only a 90 minutes set aside for that last week. We realized that maybe it was best that we stop trying to answer the questions on the spot, and we promised to put things back in writing. And so we have done that late this afternoon, and I apologize, but I did put together, it took me several hours because it was 10 pages long. We did submit something to Dan and Jay's office. And after tonight's meeting, maybe I'll add to that later, but it was just an attempt to try to address some of the concerns that were raised last week. I don't have any intention, I don't have any thought that I'm going to make everybody happy, but we're doing our best to try to answer the questions, just to be fair. I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights tonight. We got to start with a brief history. This is the third attempt of a plan of subdivision, and by attempt I mean a submission. The project started a few years ago. The owner sat down with town staff and county staff to talk about an all single-family development on the project, and they were advised that that doesn't conform with the official plan requirements for density, and they were advised that a medium density development of some sort or a higher density development of some sort would be required in order to conform with the official plan. So having said that, the first submission involved the apartment buildings, detached dwellings, and an internal street. When that application was processed, there was not a public meeting, never got that far. The Conservation Authority had some technical concerns, and it took a while, but those concerns were addressed, and the subdivision was redesigned and resubmitted, and we'll call that submission number 2. But at that point, town and county staff, they weren't big fans, those are my words, of the second submission, based on the perceived comments from the neighbors and perhaps council regarding the woodland. Both county and town strongly suggested that we come up with a development that would enlarge a very large parcel of forested land being conveyed to the town instead of a smaller piece, and then parts of the forested land staying with some of the lots. So the project team went back to the drawing board again, and this time came up with the proposal that you have in front of you tonight. The internal road was removed, so there's no new public road being proposed. The interior detached dwelling lots were removed. So what's left is a development that has, as Dan had said, single-family dwellings on the outside along the existing streets, 2 blocks that would involve 4 apartment buildings, and then a large block that would be dedicated to the town, and that would include forested land and the trail. Everyone understands, the apartments will be in the form of condominium. That means they're not rentals, they're owners, they're owned. The apartments will be in the form of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. Now, it's the developer's intentions to sell 50 of those units, the smaller ones within the affordable housing range. Affordable housing is certainly a problem everywhere these days, including Saugeen Shores, and we've heard council express on many occasions, and I have firsthand that certainly the town needs more affordable housing. Now, having said that, we heard last week at the open house that these apartment units in this particular area will be likely highly sought after, and therefore it's unlikely that the units will be sold as affordable. And that even if the developer sells them as affordable, who's to say that the next people or the people that buy them won't turn around and flip them at a much higher cost, and therefore they're not really affordable. We've thought about this all week, and to be honest, we don't disagree with that line of thinking, but it really places the developer in a position of damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. The owners want to provide affordable housing, and the town wants affordable housing, but we're not really sure what we're supposed to do or say when the proposal to provide affordable housing is questioned. And I get it, it's a tough argument to win. So maybe this makes things easier. Instead of focusing on the affordable housing aspect, and I guess we can stop talking about it, the focus should be placed on the product itself, not how much it's going to sell for, but what's being proposed. And that is a mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom apartment units that will be owned, not rented. And this is a type of housing that is nearly non-existent in the entire town. So it is something that the town needs. Moving along, last week we heard neighbors talk about how the land should be kept in the R1 zone, and the apartments would be out of character. To be clear, the lands are not zoned R1, except for a very small area. The lands are zoned PD. The planned development zone is essentially what I'd call a wait and see type zone, which generally applies to large parcels of land and doesn't allow for any development for the time being, but rather requires the changing of the zoning. And that occurs once the development for the site is proposed, like we have here tonight. Now, in terms of making it fit, yes, the apartment buildings are different than detached dwellings. The developer is trying hard to make them fit. They won't be high rise. They'll be have a maximum building height of 12 meters. They're trying to push them back from the property lines to the greatest extent possible in terms of keeping the project feasible. Of major significance to the proposal is the fact that the tree preservation will provide significant screening of these buildings as shown on the conceptual development plan. And if that plan is put on the screen, you can see maybe it's hard to see the dots, though that's the area where the tree retention will occur, and there's a significant amount of it. And you can see what I'm talking about. The buildings, for the most part, are fairly well hidden from the trees. Now, I should say that the building, the proposed building for block 14, which is closest to Market Street, will have the highest amount of exposure from the street. That building will be turned sideways, so the shortest wall of the building will face the road, and there will be new tree planting occur between the building and Market Street. With regard to trees, there was quite a bit of concern about the removal of trees. As Dan indicated, it is a significant woodland, but to be clear, the provincial policy statement does allow for development within a significant woodland where it can be demonstrated that the removal and site alteration is not going to impact the function of the woodland. And there has been as you've heard, there's been an environmental impact study done that has resulted in a tree preservation plan. And these recommendations shown before you in these plans can be implemented through a site plan agreement. As you heard from Dan, you're the county planner. This information has been peer reviewed and by the Conservation Authority, and they are not objecting to the proposed development, subject to certain conditions. I should have, before I leave that topic, I should note that the trees in the property, they don't constitute an old growth forest. There is a sewage treatment plant on the property until I believe the 1970s. There has also been the idea of subdivisions in significant woodlands is not anything new in the county or in Saugeen Shores. There have been several over the last few years, again, subject to the approval of environmental impact studies. There was a couple of questions raised last week about impact of climate change. I'm not an expert on that, but I had Mr. Morton, our wildlife expert, comment on it. And he provided this, and I'll keep this short, it's just a couple sentences. He provided the following comment: the removal of forested lands plays a negligible role in the overall broader picture of global climate change, but it is recognized that forest cover is part of the global landscape solution to addressing this issue. Scientific research has demonstrated that grasslands are more resilient carbon sinks than forests, as carbon is stored underground. Typically, 69% of the atmosphere collected carbon is stored underground, while 31% is in woody biomass. The grass-covered sinks within the subdivision will continue to function as a carbon sink. So that's from Mr. Morton, our wildlife expert. There's quite a few people at the meeting last week talked about the trail. Well, the trail isn't going anywhere. Right now, it's on privately owned property. The developer has been told by his insurance company a while ago to not allow people to actually walk on the trail and actually stop it because of liability reasons. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in these days, where people, sue other people. The owners have decided that they would not do that. But if the development does proceed, that trail it's going to be moved a little bit in part, but it will stay within a forested area within Block 13, and Block 13 will be conveyed to the town. So the town will for once actually own that laneway or that pathway. It was suggested that the land should remain untouched. Just to point out, the lands are designated residential in the official plan. And so had previous versions of the official plan going back to at least 1986. So there's no surprise that that development would be contemplated someday on these properties, or there wouldn't be if you had looked at the official plan. Moving along, traffic safety was brought up. We did discuss on a few occasions with the town's engineer about a traffic impact study if necessary. We did get correspondence a long time ago from your engineer stating that the town's traffic management plan would not require a traffic impact study for this development. The last thing I'll say is with regard to traffic, there was a lot of thought given. There's no new roads being put in, but there will be driveways. And if you take a look at the drawing, you'll see that the driveway in the northwest corner lines up with the intersection of McVicker and Geddes. And then the driveway in the southeast corner lines up with Market Street and Brook Lane intersection. And that is ideal from a traffic safety perspective. I tried to keep it within 10 minutes. I don't know how far I shot over, Mr. Mayor, but that's it for my presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So that I suppose is everything then from the applicant. So we'll move on then to the members of the public who are here who would like to speak. And as I said, we have 17 folks. And so I'll just, before I call folks in, I'll call you in by your number and by your name. So I hope that is enough for folks to know when they're coming up in the list. So the first one is from Don Devitt, and I see Don there. So good evening, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. I was at the previous meeting, and of course, with lots of issues. I suppose the one issue or two issues I'd like to bring up would be who has decided what the expression density requirements should be. Why is there a density requirement and who decides that? I've been brought to my attention that this proposal would be about 93 persons per hectare, and normally in the town it's about 12 persons per hectare. So this is quite a lot of people in a small area. So who and why is this made up this density requirement?
So what we'll do, Mr. Devitt, is if you just give us all your questions and your comments, then if there's ones that we can get answered this evening, I'll call folks to answer them. And if they're not, then we can get them addressed at when this comes back to council. Okay, so just give it all to us there.
Okay, there's that one, and then there's does the planner or does the applicant have an alternate proposal that would include R1 and the PD without going to R4 plus? And also the stream diversion. I'd like to have questions on this. I have questions on the stream diversion. Is this stream going to be placed into like a large steel pipe and piped through the property and then come out the other end? If that's the case, that would rob all the trees and the property and the animals from that water. So that's my other question. And that's about it for now.
Okay, thanks very much. So maybe we can bring the planner on. Mr. Devitt asked about how the density requirement is arrived at. Daniel, can you advise us as to how that's arrived at for this development?
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, the density targets have essentially been established in the official plans of both the town and the county. And those targets have been approved by the council of both the county and the town. So that's essentially where they come from. The county requires 15 units per hectare as a minimum density target, and the intent is to ensure that we're using land efficiently and infrastructure efficiently by increased density targets than more so than has been typical in the town in the past.
Okay, thank you. And then to the developer, Mr. Devitt asked about an alternate proposal, if you have one, and details on the stream diversion. Do you have a response for that, or is that something that you'd like to respond to when you come back, whenever you come back?
Mr. Mayor, if through you, if you don't mind, I would ask John Morton speak to the diversion and the impact on the trees.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. To respond in regards to stream diversion, that's an engineering design. John Slocum might be able to add something to that, but yes, it's going to be picked up along just outside of the buffer zone area and then redirected along the north boundary. And then when it exits the property, it'll be exiting in the exact same location as the stream course is today. There was a concern that the wildlife won't be able to use it. The wildlife, typically in the wintertime, that's more oriented to the seeps, because the seeps will, that's one of the reasons why seeps under the provincial policy are identified as significant wildlife habitat, because in the wintertime, wildlife that are in the area, local fauna, can use and access that open water. So it's not so much the stream course, it's the seeps. And that's where the significant habitat occurs, and that's where we have the buffer zone to have it all established. Once the water starts to channelize itself into stream courses, that's where we're picking it up and diverting it around the site. And then it's exiting on the exact same location as it goes to other people's property. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, very good. Okay, thank you for those answers, and thank you, Mr. Devitt. So we'll move on then to person number 2, Ms. Julie Sherwood. And hopefully Ms. Sherwood can make her way into the meeting. There she is. Okay, Ms. Sherwood, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, council members, we live on Market Street across from the forest. Without addressing the issues surrounding pedestrians getting around construction along Market and Geddes Streets, fast forward to full occupancy, 400 additional residents joining the steady stream of pedestrians converging on this very small area of town with children, wagons, beach chairs, and those massive blow-up toys. Branching out from this development, pedestrian routes like Brook Lane, Alma Street, Lustig Lane, and McVicker all allow parking, are narrow, and have no sidewalks. Overflow parking from the apartment buildings, residence parking, and trucks further compound this precarious situation. The only way to navigate these routes is for pedestrians, including children, to walk on the roads. Even Harbor and Stevens Streets have no sidewalks or crosswalks, and getting across Stevens at McVicker to the children's area involves navigating a very dangerous curve. The infrastructure on these awkwardly designed roads and corners was created when lot lines and town easements didn't really matter, and most have little, if any, room for new sidewalks. They're not designed or intended to accommodate the influx of pedestrians that will come from this development. Has a civil engineering study been done to address this? The logistics here appear to be, we'll figure it out later, after developers have cleared out and left us to live with the consequences. It's too much, too fast. They're talking about plunking down 400 people in this small end of town, an area consisting primarily of cottage-like homes with no stores, schools, or services for lower income families. What are they going to do? Struggling to pay a mortgage? And what if they have no vehicle? Pay for Ubers and cabs? Or is there public transit on the horizon? Are we going to have buses rolling through here next? This is a Pandora's box. We expected a development of houses, but this? Where else in Port Elgin are there 4 large apartment buildings tightly bunched without safe egress? This project would generate a lot of revenue for the town, but at what cost? How long will construction take on the already approved beach revitalization? And now this proposal, another 4 years of construction? What's next? That's a lot of upset, a lot of upheaval. This type of planned congestion makes no sense other than, like most driving forces in our world today, profit above all else. The affordable housing inclusion is questionable, the traffic a threat to everyone's safety, and the environmental impacts irreversible. Please, please consider rejecting or at least reducing this overambitious, poorly conceived concept. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Ms. Sherwood. Appreciate it. Okay, that moves us on to our third speaker, Pat Sermon. Do we have, oh, there's Ms. Sermon. Ms. Sermon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Pat Sermon, and I have a home on Market Street. I'm very concerned about the proposed rezoning of this area to enable this high-density development near the water. This development would change previously zoning up to an R4X. Market Street is already busy enough, already very busy without this proposed development. We have people driving to the harbor with their boats and families with children going to the beach. On top of this, there's been a huge surge of new homes, which is to be expected as the population grows. However, this has also added even more traffic. A development of this size, 150 condo units and 12 detached homes with 1 to 2 cars per household is not appropriate for this area. I am all for development, but not so close to the water. It will ruin the magic and allure of Port Elgin. High density development belongs uptown and has no place near the beach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sermon. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, so we'll move on then to speaker number 4, Penny Inkster. Ms. Inkster, please.
Mayor Charbonneau, councillors, staff, media, and guests. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. As I respect the 3-minute time limit, I will be brief. What do I find offensive about this application? The blatant disrespect for the rules regarding the development of woodlot rules. Claiming setback variances as inconsequential. No variances should be approved. Recent proposed changes on the lots from R1 to R2, which we heard tonight's gone back to R1. Proposed high density R4, so far from the town's master plan concept, dense buildings should be closer to Goderich Street. In the original report claiming incorrect school district and now admitting no guarantee of schooling or busing, not a very family-friendly space anymore. Disrespecting Indigenous rights and claims by using an old report. They're now admitting they will work with Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. Claiming affordable housing when $295,000 is not affordable for those with an income of $30,000. Last week, you admitted you did not know what the units would cost or sell for. So how can you claim anything? Only addressing surface water or storm water, not documented underground water flow. Denying existing traffic issues on Geddes and Market Street caused by recent development north of Lord Elgin Estates, and suggesting added traffic from proposed high-density development can be carried easily. Planners, mayor, councillors, I implore you to see the negative impact this proposed high-density development will have on all residents, wildlife, and carbon holding, oxygen manufacturing trees, and tourists who appreciate the beauty of Saugeen Shores. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Inkster. That moves us then on to speaker number 5, Marcel Legault. And we can bring Mr. Legault in, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for granting us this opportunity to speak to you. My name is Marcel Legault. I live at 172 Lord Elgin. I live here with my wife, Debbie. We've been here for about 2.5 years, and we back directly onto the property in question as far as the Market Street development. I would think that the council would need a pretty good reason to want to amend the official plan and the zoning bylaw in order to grant the application that's being proposed tonight. And I know that Ron doesn't want us to talk about affordable housing, but I think we need to, as a community, talk about affordable housing. The Vice Deputy Mayor just completed the task force report not too long ago. There's a desperate need for affordable housing here in Saugeen Shores. And I think to take this piece of property that's been designated as significant woodlands up until now and redesignate it into R4 and R1 development and claim that there's a affordable housing component is either a joke or an insult. I'm not sure what it is. For $295,000 for a single one bedroom, I'm not sure how that helps any of the people making less than $30,000 a year. And those are the people that I want to help. And I think those are the people that we should all be looking to help. So I guess the only question I have is, what are the options for council moving forward?
Sure. Well, I think council will discuss that at the end of the evening, and we'll hopefully the public will get some sense of what comments we have to make to the public or to the applicant, and that will become clear with time what our options are.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that moves us on to our sixth speaker, Adrian Mason, and can we bring Ms. Mason in?
Hello, thank you for having me. I have two comments that I would appreciate some feedback on. The first is has been mentioned a number of times, so I won't spend much time on it, but regarding the local official plan amendment, changing from a significant woodland where the official plan has stated development shall not occur to a position where development is allowed to go forward is a big change, especially with this being the only significant woodland left in what would be the historic Port Elgin boundaries. So I think that needs to be considered separately, just from being tied to this one development being able to go forward. So that's my first comment and question, to separate these two issues and look at them independently. And the second part of my comment is regarding the proximity to the archaeological site in Nodwell Park. So the Town of Saugeen Shores plaque, historical plaque, and information on the website is still citing information from the 1974 Stewart report, which references Iroquois or Haudenosaunee longhouses on the property. And more recent information has revealed that this was in fact an Anishinaabe village site, which would be ancestors of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation in their traditional territory. And in the 1974 report, human remains were found on this site. And the document that was produced by the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation about procedures and standards for archaeology in the traditional territory states that significant cultural sites, especially ones that have to do with old sand dune deposits, should be considered very carefully before development proceeds. There was a stage 2 archaeological assessment done, which digs test pits at the surface level, but because of the sand dune ecosystem, deposits made in the 13 and 1400s would likely be at greater depths than those test pits would reveal. So I think stage 3 and stage 4 archaeological studies should be considered. And they are also referenced in the report from Saugeen Ojibwe Nation in 2011. Those stage 3 and stage 4 assessments are recommended when human remains have been found and there's significance associated with the archaeological site. So those are my 2 comments, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. All right, that moves us on to our speaker number 7, Sandra Mercer. Can we bring Ms. Mercer in?
Ms. Mercer, if you could just share your screen and put your video on.
Are you there?
Yes.
Nope. There you are. Okay.
Here we go.
Yep, go ahead.
I thought I was already connected, but obviously not.
There you
Thank
are.
you very much for letting me have my opinions on this. I have a couple of questions. There is a minimum square footage normally for housing. Is there one established for the 12 single detached units? A minimum square footage for what the house size would be?
Ms. Mercer, if you would just give us all of your questions up front, and then I'll endeavor to get them answered once you're finished.
Okay, then on the Faulkner Street extension, which is the normal pathway on the north side of the Nodwell Park, that we normally walk through, is that still going to be a walkable area going into the vacant lot and then down into your block 13?
Are there any other questions, or is
No,
that your only?
that's all my questions.
Okay,
Yes, thank
very
you.
good. Sure. So I'll put those. So the first one, you asked if there's a minimum square footage for the buildings to be constructed. I see the developer come online. Randy, do you have a comment?
Yes, as far as minimum square footage, that would be up to the building code and up to the zoning bylaw. If there's any provision for a minimum square footage, there's no intention to be below a minimum at this point. We are suggesting somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,600 to 2,000, possibly 2,400 square foot, give or take, depending to fit the size of the property appropriately.
So maybe I'll put the question to the planner who can speak to the municipal regulations on the question of square footage.
Sure.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, the zoning bylaw does not contain provisions for minimum square footage within the R1 zone.
So there's no minimum.
Is there a maximum?
There's no maximum, but there is a maximum lot area coverage provision. I don't have the number right in front of me at this moment. I believe it's 10%, perhaps 15% of the lot can be developed, and the rest would have to be open space.
Okay, so we got an answer to that one. So the other question was about the Faulkner Street extension of the walking path and whether the connection will still exist there. Perhaps Mr. Davidson or somebody else on the proponent side can speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the walking trail right now starts at the southwest corner of the property, Getty's the market, and it runs diagonally, almost perfectly diagonally, right up to Nodwell Park. That trail is going to continue to exist, but about halfway through, there's going to be a jog, if you will, in the existing trail. It has to be moved a little bit in order to make room for the one apartment building, but it will remain within a forested area.
Okay.
Thank
you very much, Ms. Mercer, for your questions. So that moves us then on to our 8th speaker, Ashkan Saberi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for your time. So thanks. My name is Ash Saberi. I live on Market Street. My property backs onto the trails. So I would just like to start off by saying that I oppose the current plan that's been put forth about the future of the Market Street Forest. The forest on Market Street is an amenity that the entire town takes advantage of. The trails and the wildlife that occupy it are a part of what the town is. In 2020, there was a petition on change.org titled Save the Market Street Forest. The petition received 5,700 signatures. We have such few green spaces left in our town already, and as we expand, we should be aiming to try and expand out as opposed to expanding from within. There has been plenty of science to prove how effective trees are in slowing down global climate change and dampening carbon emissions. I know Mr. Davidson just mentioned that their environmental expert says otherwise, but I would like to say that trees provide significant photosynthesis that capture CO2 from the air. If your environmental expert disagrees, I think, and thinks that apartment buildings are better at photosynthesis than the trees, I think we have bigger problems at hand. This forest includes trails which get decent foot traffic, whether it's kids riding their bikes, people walking their dogs, or just families that have gone for a family walk. Having these trails has been such a great blessing during the pandemic. I see firsthand how much foot traffic we get. And I think that losing this forest is a huge loss for not just the neighboring homes. This is a great loss for the entire town. This forest is part of the town's history, and it's still used for recreational activities today. I think just the petition itself is pretty good proof that our town doesn't really want this. I would also like to point out that the neighborhood these apartments would be built beside. This is a cottage neighborhood with small cottages. These apartments don't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood, but it's not just the eye test that's the problem. Geddes and Market Streets are unequipped to deal with the increased car traffic that these apartments would bring. Market Street's already incredibly busy in the summer when families are heading for the harbor and to the beach. There will be many congestion issues. There's two intersections, which are three-way intersections in the area. That's Geddes Market and Harbor intersection and Alma Market Harbor intersection. These two intersections have significant safety issues with the current proposal. There's also further development happening at the beach, which certainly won't help this current problem. There are multiple families in this neighborhood who have small kids, including mine. This is very concerning for us. I strongly believe that this development around the water sorry, let me state that sentence again. I strongly believe that the development around the water should match the aesthetic of the neighboring communities. That includes the density of the communities that are already built. And R4 zoning is not really compatible with this neighborhood. Mr. Davidson mentioned that the forest is not currently zoned, and therefore it's not a problem to designate it as an R4. Because last week someone mentioned that it should just be an R1, and he is correct. It's not currently zoned, but that's because it's a forest. It's not a neighborhood. So I think if we're going to zone it anything, it should be matching the aesthetic around the forest, not just something we're going to pull out of a hat. I'm happy that our town council is pushing for the topic of home affordability. However, the objective of this project makes very little sense in that regard. These apartments will be a 2-minute walk to the harbor, a 5-minute walk to the main beach. Regardless of what the builder's saying concerning the prices of these condos will not reach the hands of everyday townfolk for the price they're saying. Mr. Davidson already alluded to this earlier, and he even agreed. I imagine the town council is well aware of the prices of homes that are close to the water. A building that close to the water, we won't be bidding with just folks in town for it. We'll be bidding with investors and people looking to purchase for recreational use. And therefore, whatever apartment and condos come out of this project is not going to significantly help our current home affordability problems. Councilors, I'd like to please request that you consider these issues when you're making this decision. Losing this forest would be a huge loss for our town. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Saberi. Much appreciated. So that moves on to our ninth speaker, Mark Brown. And can we bring Mr. Brown in, please? Mr. Brown, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Firstly, I'd like to say that I applaud this council for its recent commitment to environmental stewardship. But then going on from that, high density development in this particular area for the Market Street development doesn't align with this commitment. And this development request offers an ideal opportunity for council to act on their promise of environmental stewardship by turning the application down. Actions speak a lot more than words. And there are numerous less environmentally sensitive areas in Saugeen Shores where high density development could occur. The environmental impact assessment, it should be redone with a specific focus on the designation of the land as a significant woodland and the type of development that will best avoid a significant environmental impact. The updated environmental impacts assessment should consult the local residents, many of whom have reported significant issues such as underground streams and ongoing flooding. While it may be appropriate to change the official plan to designate the lands as SPA 4, as noted in the planning report, the intent of SPA 4 must then be respected. And this doesn't include high density development. This means that neither R4 nor R2, although we've been corrected on the R2 now, a little bit of a surprise tonight, should be contemplated. And the only development should be zoned R1. The reality is that this development is only possible by a grotesque manipulation of rules that are intended to provide constraints to unfettered construction. The assurance that there will be a high proportion of affordable dwellings is neither credible nor sustainable. The reality is that the units will provide profit to the developers, their investors, and to purchasers of the units, all of which are not unreasonable, all of whom already have top 10th percentile income at least. Finding a deposit, paying the mortgage, and paying ongoing condominium fees is beyond the capabilities of low-income families. The likelihood of even one of these units being occupied by a family requiring affordable housing is infinitesimally small. The addition of properties with access only from Geddes Street more than doubles the number of properties using this street for access. There has been no formal analysis of the impact of this increase in traffic along a street which has sections of lower than standard width with two potentially hazardous intersections with Market Street and McVicar Street. The tree preservation plan needs to clearly specify how trees will be protected in the presence of construction activity, including heavy machinery. Currently, the tree preservation plan is a drawing only. The impact of emerald ash borer should also be included. And in the event that trees are disturbed inadvertently, there should be a specific plan for tree replacement as required by the SPA 4 designation. So I ask this council, do they want to leave a legacy that includes this inappropriate and precedent-forming subdivision, approved for reasons that challenge the very foundation of Saugeen Shores as a community? Or do they want their legacy to be one of sensitivity to sustainable environment, community, and town character? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. That moves us on then to our speaker number, our speaker number 10, Nancy Rose. Ms. Rose. Are we able to bring Ms. Rose into the meeting? Daniel, you have your hand up there. Are you looking to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Mayor, through you. I just wanted to go back to comments from Ms. Mercer, who asked a question regarding the open maximum lot area provision. And so I just wanted to correct the record. The maximum lot area for the R1 zone is 45%. That essentially means 45% of the lot can be developed and covered by a structure. I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Yep, good. Thanks for that clarification. Are we able to, oh, I see Nancy Rose's name there. Are you there, Ms. Rose?
She doesn't appear to be accepting.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is perhaps I can move on to speaker number 11, and if Ms. Rose comes on or is available, we can pick her up later on. So why don't we go to speaker number 11, Chris Godfrey. Is Mr. Godfrey there? Oh, there you are. Mr. Godfrey, you're on mute there, sir. So if you can unmute yourself, and then once you've done that, the floor is yours.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I agree with much of the comments by earlier people, Mr. Councillor and councillors, on the density of the place. It just seems to be too much for this piece of property. One of my concerns with this density is actually the traffic. If it were to go ahead, as the applicant has suggested, there's going to be roughly 400 or more people in the area, in this development, and maybe a couple of hundred cars. If you just say one car per property, you're almost immediately up to 200. See, so I'm concerned that the density of this development will mean that roughly 75% of those cars, 150 cars or so, will be exiting onto Geddes Street, and 25% will be exiting onto Market Street. I feel that there should be a more balanced approach to this, and I mentioned this in an email I sent to council. And if somehow the property can be arranged so that at least 50% of the traffic exit onto Market Street, then I think that corner of Geddes, Market, Stevens, in that area will be much relieved from sort of potential safety hazards, and especially for children in summertime. I actually own the property on the very corner there of, with my family, of Stevens, Market, Geddes, and I see several incidences during the summer where people have close shaves with cars that are going along Market and Stevens, or coming down Harbour rather, Stevens, or coming down Market. It bothers me quite a bit. We've been in there now since the late 80s, about 35 years, and every year I've seen some little incident happen, really worrying incident. And so if we can divert more traffic away from that corner, especially the traffic coming along Geddes Street, going south along Geddes Street to the corner, if we can divert some of that traffic away, maybe put it higher up on Market Street, or see if there's some other alternative, I'd appreciate the planners and the council sort of taking that into account. Other than that, I'm sympathetic with many of the concerns people have, but my overall major concern is the density and the traffic that it generates. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much. So are we able to bring Ms. Rose in, or?
We hope so.
Oh, there you are, Ms. Rose. We hear you now. Very good.
Okay. Just let me. Okay, I am, good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm speaking tonight about the traffic and what it would be like in this neighborhood if the development continues as planned. I counted the residences and the cottages on the following streets: Trillium Drive, Lord Elgin Place, Geddes Street, McVicker Street, Rustic Lane, Macbeth Lane. These are the streets where residents would typically, oh, I'm sorry here. There we go. Typically exit by McVicker or Geddes. There are 111 residences in total, with about 25 of those being seasonal residences. In comparison, the development as proposed has 117 units plus 5 additional building lots. If the proposed development it goes ahead as planned, it has the potential to double the numbers of personal vehicles on the streets, specifically on Geddes and McVicker. Is this a problem? Yes. Both McVicker and Geddes are narrow, and there are lots of things happening on these streets. This is an area near the water where people come for holidays, to relax, and to play safely. People use Geddes to access the beach, go to the harbor, or get on the trail. Those who use McVicker are going to the trail, to the post boxes, or the splash pad. Last summer, a daycare came regularly down McVicker Street on their way to the splash pad. Who else uses McVicker and Geddes? Who are using the traveled portion of the road, but not the cars, are bicycles, skateboards, rollerblades, and scooters. Joggers don't use the sidewalks either. All year round, there are walkers and people with dogs. There are lots of dogs in this neighborhood. Aside from the residents and visitors using these streets, there are going to be delivery vehicles, and they must be considered. We see them daily, and with the increasing amount of online purchasing, their numbers will increase as well. Doubling the traffic in the cottage neighborhood is not a positive for Port Elgin. This proposal should be revisited, reduced, or relocated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Much appreciated. That brings us on to our speaker number 12, Brian Smythe. Can we bring Brian Smythe in, please?
Brian, if we can get you to share your video and your mic, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, see if I can get my video up. I don't see my video camera running.
Well, that's okay. We can hear you just fine, sir. So if you're prepared to get going, the floor is yours.
Yeah, count yourself lucky you can't see me. So first of all, I'd like to thank the council for allowing me time to share my personal point of view with you. For those that can't speak Glaswegian, I'm sure Mr. Dave Mayek can dealt with Dave a long time, so he'll be able to translate for you. So I would also like to congratulate the developers for doing such a great job of laying out their development. I have never seen so many homes crammed into such a small area. I have worked and lived in several areas of North America, UK, Canada, and I'm happy to now call for 23 years Port Elgin my home. I've been resident in Bowmanville for 2 years at the Darling refurbishment, and I can tell you the biggest development down there was townhomes in the where I stayed. Even in my hometown of Glasgow, a complete town was built for the Commonwealth Games with nothing greater than 2 stories. And the criteria there was also for low-cost first-time buyers, for which this was very successful. I'll in turn start my question of why. So first of all, with the developer in mind, that point of view is simple. It's all about how much money they can make at the expense of the residents of this town. The excuse of affordable housing is an ends to a means, and by the way, just good PR. I tried to follow the money, but that was difficult. They have formed their own investment company, and I still can't figure out who will be the builder, and also where will they get their labour from to do the building. They will, in the name of progress and the great Canadian dollar, destroy a quiet residential area that your predecessors thought was important. In answer to Don earlier on, who said decided R4, I'm afraid, Don, that was a developer. To be honest, they could build townhomes and make the county standards. but not much money would be made that way. It's all about return on investment. And from my numbers, there is a significant return on this, well above what normal people would go after. They will fight dearly to retain the highest level of investment. And to be fair, they're not in this for charity, guys. They're doing this purely selfishness to make money. The developer now wants to maximize that density and go for the largest that they can and go for R4. My next question is, why would the town support this? Good question. The town is right. The need for affordable housing and to increase the housing density. Well, affordable, that's a pipe dream. The houses will be snapped up by investors, buying to rent to all contractors, who actually all get a substantial allowance to stay here. Housing associations could be formed to actually control that, but that would require the investor to hang around after they've completed it, and is a lot of extra work managing a housing association. If first-time buyers manage to get a mortgage, the condo fees will probably make it that they can't afford it anyway. The increase in density, county minimum is stated is at 15, and if one of my previous displayers is correct, we have moved to 93 at R4. That is a substantial increase. One item that I have not heard discussed is the noise and light pollution. The amount of lights will be significant because of the car parking, and the noise generated from the large AC fan units on the roof will actually sound very much like the local wind turbines. And we all know how much Port Elgin supported the wind turbines. So here we have a similar idea with massive amounts of noise pollution. This development, because of where it's located, is also an amphitheatre, and the noise will reverberate round as an increase of the planned layout. All of us that live down here, we can hear noise coming from the beach at all times. But you know what? It doesn't run 24/7. So do you know what? That's good. But the noise from the AC units on this thing will reverberate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These types of developments are better suited for flat greenfield site, where the space and layout can be maximized to the aesthetics as well as traffic flows. With this development, you actually get neither. Please think carefully. I urge you, for your community's future and at the request of your residents, to reject this misuse of land and deny the R4 request and set a lower level to fit in with the area that is around this area and not allow this total mixed use. These developers are not our neighbours, they are not our friends, and they are purely in this for the purpose of maximising their profit. I trust that you as elected officials will control this dash for cash. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smythe. Okay, now we'll move on to our 13th speaker, Frank Vanderswet. We bring in Frank Vanderswet, please.
Am I there?
Here you are, sir. The floor is yours.
All right. So Holly and I were scheduled as 13 and 14. I will just be speaking and we'll perhaps save a little bit of time doing this. So thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Holly and I are residents at 188 Lord Elgin Place, backing on to the properties in question on Market Street. If you're like me, you may have had a hard time grasping just how massive this proposal is, just how badly it suits the area. Seeing it on a computer screen or on paper just isn't adequate. So let me try and use some visualization to paint a clearer picture. Almost everybody here today should be familiar with the apartment complex near Devonshire and Waterloo at the north end of Port Elgin. Apart from the Plex, perhaps Walmart and Canadian Tire, these are three of the largest structures in town. As they should be, they're located near the highway, near amenities, including groceries, pharmacy, the shopping, and the Plex. They're serviced by a traffic circle and a roadway that is almost exclusively for their safe access and egress. This whole apartment complex is roughly the same number of units as the condo complex proposed and has a very similar footprint, almost identical footprint. That does not include the additional 12 single dwelling lots already also proposed. Now visualize taking this whole complex, all those large buildings, moving them to another location about 2 kilometers from the highway and from amenities. So the residents now have to drive to do anything, to do shopping, to get to work, and many other activities. Now picture changing that main access road so there's no traffic circle to manage flow. And let's move it to a street that's already busy. Let's take it a step further and make that main access a substandard road, like Geddes Street. Let's add a tight corner to get onto that road, like Market and Geddes. Let's also consider having another driveway that serves one of the condos coming out onto a hill on Market Street. Picture yourself coming out of that driveway, wondering if there's any traffic coming down over the crest of that hill. Neither of these entries is particularly safe. Let's carry the visualization a little further. Let's take that complex from that otherwise flat open field and squish it into one of the few remaining forested areas in town. Let's not just put it into any forested area. Let's add a stream, an adjacent hill, several seeps, so we have some nice drainage challenges. Oh, and to squish it into that space, a significant variance is also required, reducing the frontage on one unit to less than half the normal requirement. Moving on to the tree preservation plan. It claims that at least 30% of the trees will be preserved. This is very, very misleading. The 2 eastmost buildings show trees only about 5 meters away along their entire eastern length, as well as on the north and south ends. There's no way 2-story buildings will be built while still retaining existing trees only 5 meters away. No problem. As the tree prevention plan says, trees will be replanted to replace any that need to be removed for construction. Add to that the need to reroute a stream, deal with seeps, and relocate a public access path. Again, no problem. They can just remove more trees, old trees, and plant new ones. Since when are newly planted 3 or 5-year-old trees the same as mature 30, 50, or even 100-year-old trees? This is not tree preservation. With trees, there's strength in numbers. Very few trees in that forest were lost this fall with the extreme winds we experienced. However, in the tree prevention plan, there would be several smaller stands of trees and some very narrow strips of forest, including directly behind my place and my neighbors. Many of these are very unlikely to survive any windstorms, even half as severe as those we saw this fall. If you have any doubts, just look at what's been happening at the North Shore Park recently. If the proposed development is approved, how much of the current forest will actually be preserved? I doubt it's anywhere near 30%, maybe 20, maybe less. That would be irresponsible. We heard just a little while ago that grass is supposed to be a good environmental alternative to trees. That's irrelevant when trees are being replaced by pavement and concrete. We've already heard about how this property can't be considered affordable housing, so I won't belabor that point any further, other than to say it would be much more beneficial to have it located closer to job locations downtown and closer to other amenities. So does this proposal make sense? It's not consistent with existing plans and guidelines. It's environmentally irresponsible. It's not consistent with traffic safety standards, and it's not going to be affordable housing. I urge councillors not to approve the proposed zoning change or the variance required. This development is wrong for this location. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. And so is Holly is not going to speak then?
Holly is not going to be speaking now. I took her part.
Well, thanks to you and to Holly nonetheless. And we will go on then to speaker number 15, Keith Robertson. Can we bring Mr. Robertson in? The floor is yours, sir.
Hi, sorry, just setting that thing up. Good evening, folks. My name's Keith Robertson, and my wife Tracy and I live on Lower Elgin Place. By now, you've heard enough compelling reasons why the Market Street development is simply wrong, so I will keep my comments to the point. This is an ill-conceived development and is based on a couple flawed promises. I'll refrain from calling them lies at this point. The two main issues are the promise of 33% tree retention is difficult to believe. It is a struggle to think that 30% of the mature trees will survive the heavy construction, the storm drain work, and the changes to the land. The promise of affordable housing is a hoax, and I'm glad the developer has recognized this. So please, let's stop using this as a justification for this development, and let's start looking at alternative sites for the people of Saugeen Shores and affordable housing. The injection of 400 people into the Market Street, the small Market Street parcel of land, will cause significant congestion and general chaos. This is irreversible, and we have to live with it forever. As stated, there is absolutely nothing that can be done with the existing infrastructure to improve traffic and pedestrian flow. There was an earlier comment that the two driveways will improve traffic flow, but I don't understand that, and I'd like to that explained or expanded on after, please. When we purchased our house, we thought the property behind us might be developed. However, we relied on zoning bylaws to protect us. Zoning bylaws exist to protect the land, the environment, and people. All these disappear when the zoning bylaw amendments, or if council approves the zoning bylaw amendments. With the proposed development, there'll be a road, a driveway 3 feet from my property. The noise associated with 100, 150 vehicles coming in out of that complex will directly impact our well-being, and that's our sleep and our privacy. This will impact our day-to-day lives. For Pete's sakes, the driveway points directly into the backyard of a couple houses on our street. The barrage of lights and noise from vehicles will drive those people crazy. Why should we have to put up with this? Why should we have to live with this? Trying to force high density into an existing residential area makes no sense. I'll look to the Summerside apartment complex as a great example of how high density living should be planned. Up in that area, there is open spaces, access to the highway, access to services, and roundabouts to help traffic flow. It is great that the builder can come into our town and make millions of dollars off this development. But the reality is my house and our property will depreciate probably $50,000 to $100,000 with this development. And that's primarily because I have a road immediately behind my house. Is this acceptable? Final question for Mr. Kingsbury. The Market Street property has been in discussion for several years now. I understand that a traffic study, as stated, isn't required, but surely as a planner or counsel yourself, you would have completed some type of due diligence checks with respect to traffic and people flow, i.e. come down here, taking a look around on a Saturday or Sunday in July and August and look at the traffic. I'd like to understand when this, if this has been completed. If so, what dates were people, council, Dan, you down here looking around, and what your observations were. If this has not been completed, this project needs to be deferred or delayed until this study is complete. In closing, I've yet to meet anybody in town who thinks this is a good fit for our town and our area. As elected officials who represent the public, council, please do not approve these zoning bylaw changes. That's the end of my report. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Robertson. You had a couple of questions in there, and I'll endeavor to get an answer to them. The first one was your question about how will the driveway improve the traffic situation as opposed to a road, which was in the earlier iterations of the plan. Mr. Davidson?
Yeah, so yeah, that's not exactly how I put it, Mr. Mayor. I didn't say it would improve the situation. What I did say was from an engineering or traffic engineering perspective, it's ideal to line up these driveway entrances with existing intersections instead of having them staggered. That is kind of engineering 101. I didn't say it would improve a situation. Thank you.
Okay, good enough. Thank you. And then the other question was with regard to a traffic study, and perhaps we could have the planner make a comment about traffic studies and what's required in terms of a traffic study. I will note too that the town of Saugeen Shores just recently passed a guideline for doing traffic impact assessments as well. And so I don't know, do you have some comments about how this, what kind of traffic studies are required for a development like this?
Well, they're not required. What has been done? This has been on the books for 3 years. Surely you people have been down here looking around to understand what the congestion is down here.
Sure.
Please
Understood. What's required and what's been done?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor. So we typically defer to the experts in traffic. In this case, it would be the local road authority, the town in this case. The town employs professional engineers who make determinations on which studies are required in support of certain application. In this case, the determination was that a traffic impact statement was not required to support the application by town staff. And so we took that advice in advising the applicant in terms of what the complete application requirements were for the application. I will note we have heard a number of traffic concerns through the public comments received in the public meeting here tonight. So part of this process is to reflect on the public comments that have been received, discuss them with the local road authority, and to address those concerns. So I think that's the next step in this process here.
I would agree. I would suggest that we've heard from several members of the public here this evening with concern about traffic. So I think it would be a good idea to have the staff members who have done these assessments speak to council that when this comes back to talk about how the conclusion was reached that a traffic impact study wasn't required in order to answer those questions and give us some more detail.
I think it's unacceptable that this hasn't happened over the last couple of years, that nobody has taken enough interest to come down here and look around. And because it's the dead of winter in February right now, you're going to have to wait till July or August to get a good picture of a snapshot of what it's like down here.
Just to be clear, Mr. Robinson, that isn't what was said. We didn't suggest that nothing's been done. Some experts have looked at it, and I've just requested they come and speak to council about how they reached the conclusions they've reached. So we will get more information on it. But thank you very much. So that moves us on to speaker number 16, Haley Shapiro.
Mr. Mayor, speaker number 16 has left the meeting.
Okay.
And I also want to advise that speaker number 17 did not join us tonight. So either of those speakers have comments, please feel free to email us. But that does conclude our the number of speakers that we have for this evening. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say on behalf of council to all those who have spoken to us this evening, thank you very much. Your comments are much appreciated, and I would reiterate what the clerk has just said. If you weren't able to join us this evening, please, and you still have comments you'd like to make, please feel free to write to council. And when we are wrapping up the meeting here, I will ask the planner to let us know where additional comments can be sent for council to consider. So with that, we're at the end of the public meeting. So now we will turn things over to members of the committee for questions of clarification and any comments you might have. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, and to you, Mr. Mayor. A few comments, a few questions to go through. Definitely the biggest thing, I mean, I'm sure we've all heard, I've heard from a lot of people over the last 6 months over this. I followed along with a few of the plans. I did watch the meeting last week to try and get some background on it. You know, not gonna lie, sort of disappointed here to hear that the traffic study wasn't recommended. It's something that myself, I'd like to see us put in as a condition if that's something that we're able to do. I guess, first of all, is that a question I can ask Daniel or Jay, who can answer that one? And how would we go about having that done if we wanted it to be a requirement?
Any comments from the planner, Jay?
Yeah, certainly council can provide direction to staff if you feel it's necessary, but Dan also said it's important to reflect on the comments received, and certainly we'll want to discuss what that means once the meeting's concluded, and we'll have the time to reflect on all comments, not just related to traffic.
Yeah, I get just the point here. A lot of people, a lot of the comments I've heard have really stressed on the traffic. Myself, I know a lot of people live down along there, and I've heard a lot of complaints for ages. There are a lot of young kids, and speed is definitely an issue. You know, we're going to add 400 to 500 plus movements a day in that one little corner when we've already have a horrible corner. We've already stated that the road isn't up to standards, although we just redid that one not that long ago. I believe, I could be corrected, but I think we're a meter shy of what we're normally supposed to be. I think we're 7 meters where we're supposed to be 8 meters wide. You know, to introduce that much more traffic into that area without a traffic study. You know, I understand town staff have looked at it, but I can't disagree with the comments I'm hearing that I think more has to be done on that one. I guess move on.
The CAO wants to make a comment to that one. Councillor Carr, the CAO.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, through you, I think I'd just like to add that part of the background around the requirement for the traffic study is around the traffic the TMP, the traffic master plan that was done. So we just recently did the transportation master plan, and our engineer at the time when this application came through acknowledged that through the work that went into that TMP, traffic transportation master plan, that between the work between her and the engineer on the file, that they felt that the traffic study, the additional study wasn't required because of the work that had just recently been completed for the master plan. So as Jay indicated, we'll get more information for council on that and bring that back to the next meeting. But I wanted to give you that context that the timing of when the application came in didn't warrant the additional study because of the timing with that transportation master plan. So I just want to give you that context, but as Jay mentioned, we'll reflect on everything that we've heard tonight and bring that back, those comments back in that context.
Thank you. Carry on, Councillor Carr.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the next question I would go, Mrs. Mason, and I heard her arguments last week as well in regards to the archaeological assessment that should be done in this property. Hearing that we've only had a phase 1 or phase 2 done. You know, I'm just wondering if this is a correct statement that I've heard that, you know, because human remains were found, is that something that indicates that a 3 and 4 must be done, or is this something that still has to be decided by SON, or is this something that's in legislation that tells us which way we go with it?
Turn over to the planner first, the planner.
Yeah, so thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I understand there were human remains found on an adjacent site, Nodwell Park, not on the subject lands themselves. And so typically when there's an archaeological artifacts found within 300 meters of any site, it triggers an assessment. And that assessment follows certain guidelines in terms of how far they go, whether it's a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. And so a professional archaeologist would make that determination, and that assessment is submitted to the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport, who essentially accept the report and the conclusions of the report. So that's what's been done with the assessment that's been provided. But as I did mention, we have reached out to SON directly to confirm they are reviewing it, and they have in fact confirmed they are reviewing the application, particularly in regards to archaeology. And so we expect to continue that dialogue and hear back from them in terms of whether or not they deem it acceptable or if additional work is required. At this point, I don't know. I don't want to speculate or speak to them. It's an ongoing discussion point we're having with them.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I got a few more to go
through. Carry on.
Yes. And then, as I said, I followed this along for a little while. I've seen some of the earlier drawings, and I'm curious as to whether or not they can give us any indication as to why the roadway was removed and we've gone to a driveway. You know, still calling a roadway that's seen that kind of traffic a day is a lot. Just curious, it comes down to the traffic again. Myself, I'm wondering if emergency services have made comment on this. You know, we did have a major storm down that way earlier this year, or last year, I guess now, that blocked off our access to an awful lot of that area. We have one entrance I'm seeing into, you know, 150 plus residents. Is that something that you know, myself, I'm not real strong on all the planning. This is where we rely on you guys for it. But I seem to remember this issue, you know, when it goes back to Collard Way, another subdivision that because it wasn't it didn't have a second exit, there was a limitation to the amount of properties or residential units I think we can have on there. Is this the same type of idea, or is this why we're using the wording of a roadway versus driveway? I guess just wanted some clarity there.
Sure, we'll ask Mr. Davidson to comment.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, so that was our second proposal, having a street go through there, Councillor Carr. But some of the comments that came back, and I don't disagree, from town staff and the county staff, were if you don't put a road through, a connecting road, you'll be saving a lot more trees, and you'll be able to provide the town with one large contiguous parcel of land. So if you ran a road through, block 13 would be divided and less of it.
Okay, so it's just trying to save green space is what the reasoning was there.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess just a few other notes that I had down here too. I mean, I'm glad that Ron addressed the affordable lingo here. I don't think affordable or attainable should be used in this. I mean, we're all aware of where this is being built. I guess that would kind of lead into my next question here. Is they said that we're looking at 12 meters. I'm guessing 12 meter, what's that going to be measured from? Are we bringing in fill for it? Are we still too early to say that? Will the fourth apartment building that it's on its own be at a different level than the rest? Are they still going to be all at the same height? And another question I had fielded from lots of people that have been in contact with me was there going to be anything proposed for rooftop?
Anybody on the proponents team want to speak to that, Mr. Davidson?
Yeah, regarding the rooftop, there are no plans for rooftop patios. That was a question was asked last week. With regard to the building height and fill, if that's required, I'm going to ask through the mayor to please allow Mr. Slocum, the civil engineer, to speak.
Sure, Mr. Slocum.
So I guess at this point, it's pretty hard to say exactly what the grading plan would be. This is it's a conceptual plan at this point. The vertical dimension is measured from the ground outside of the building. So when we have a grading plan prepared, we would be able to sort out those details.
So that's going to come back at a later time then.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, just one other question that I had written down from tonight too earlier when they were talking about our normal density that we shoot for. What is it normally? Like they're saying that this proposed development could see 93 people per hectare, normal's 12. What are we normally shooting for? Do we normally have a goal? Is that something they can get back to me if they don't have it right there? But
we can ask the planner, Mr. Kingsbury.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, so there are minimums and there are maximums. So the minimums are essentially established in the county official plan, and the minimum density is 15 units per hectare for a subdivision. The town's official plan establishes maximum densities for high density residential. Perhaps Jay Posner may know, but I believe it's 95 units per hectare. I don't have the number at my fingertips, so I can follow up unless Jay happens to know offhand that maximum density.
Not without looking, so.
We'll get that information at a later date.
Okay, thank you. That's good for me.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. My first question is a follow-up to correspondence from Bill and Deb White, who didn't speak tonight, but did speak in last week's meeting. And I wondered if, even if I can't get it tonight, if I can get a comment from this later. Their concern is about the location of the catchment infrastructure. Their comment is that the SVCA had requested that this be moved outside of the 15-meter setback, and that the new proposal for block 13 removes the old setback outside of the 15-meter setback. So according to Mr. and Mrs. White's email, Mr. Morton's response to this concern is that this is part of the tree preservation area, so there should be no issue. I believe the White's concern is that without the setback designation, groundwater infrastructure could be installed in this area at a later date. Is there, could someone comment on that, please?
We have somebody on the, oh yeah, Mr. Davidson.
Yeah, either of the two Johns, please, if you can answer that.
Yeah, anybody who thinks they have an answer is welcome to speak at this point.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not completely understanding the question that was put forward when we had our meeting last week with the Wrights. They brought forward their concern that on the site plan, the 15-meter buffer didn't go all the way to the north boundary. And there is a legal issue there dealing with right of way for drainage and so forth. That's why it's not shown on the site plan. In regards to the catchment, I'm not sure the terminology is being used correctly. I don't know whether she's referring to a catchment drain that water's flowing into, or a surface water catchment basin for the hydrology. So that's where I get a little confused on the terminology of the question. Part of the questions that were put forward are in that written response that Ron Davidson talked about earlier this evening.
Okay.
10 pages long. And we did provide comments in there in regards to the hydrology aspect and the catchment area, if that is what she's referring to. I'm not 100%.
I'm using the
I hope that helps.
terminology. I'm using the terminology from the White's correspondence. So if you've responded to that, I haven't seen the response from Mr. Davidson yet. So I would welcome looking at that, and thank you very much for that. I have a couple of more questions, Mr. Mayor.
Could I just ask to the planner or somebody or Jay, you guys have that correspondence from Mr. Davidson, and it will be circulated to council right away, I assume?
We received it. I haven't read it myself, so when we've read it, we'll circulate it to our normal process for circulating council this type of information. Okay,
thank you. Sorry, Councilor Grace.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Morton. So I read your report from 2000, which was, I think the study was completed from the fall of 2016 to the summer of 2017. And it indicates no significant wildlife habitat in areas such as waterfowl, shorebird, raptor or butterfly migratory or wintering areas, bat, turtle, reptile wintering and hibernating areas, nesting bird breeding habitats, or deer wintering areas. So because this was completed 5 years ago or so, I've read a couple of articles published just this month which discussed how global migratory bird patterns are changing as a result of climate change, even in the last couple of years. And I know just from my own totally non-professional experience, I'm a Chantry Island tour guide, and I know that my colleagues in that group have talked about how just the nesting patterns on Chantry Island have changed just in the last couple of years as well, that we have certain birds now that are there that we didn't see before and vice versa. So I wondered, do you think that any of these migratory or other fauna habits may have changed, and that an updated review of this section of the EIS would be helpful?
Morton.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. In response to the question.
You're breaking up a bit.
Yes, I understand what you're referring to. The guidelines for an EIS. Am I breaking up?
Yeah, we're losing you a bit, Mr. Morton. I wonder if you could just turn
Change a
your,
little bit now and then due to
turn
climate
your,
change.
if you could shut your camera off, maybe that might help. We're just give that a try.
Is that a little better? Better?
Keep going and we'll see.
Okay. Okay. In regards to bird migration patterns, there are a few fluctuations on a global basis, but in a provincial basis, things haven't changed too much. Species numbers go up and down, but migration patterns stay consistent. The province set out their primary concern for migration was woodlands that are associated within 5 kilometers of Lake Ontario. That's where birds need resting before they cross over to the Great Lakes. Beyond that, the whole Lake Huron shoreline and up to Manitoulin Island and further north, the forest cover patterns. So the province of Ontario set out the standards and the guidelines in that regard. So I'm a local perspective. Yes, there are some minor fluctuations, but from a provincial planning policy standpoint and official plans, we're still all there. We meet all the requirements. In regards to some of the other aspects, the only other thing that could be looked at would be potentially species at risk. Quite commonly that once you get more than 3 years of age, stuff of that nature might be reassessed in case a butternut tree germinated in there over the last few years. But other than that, everything else is following policy procedures. Hopefully that helped.
Yes, thank you very much. 2 more questions. And these are both for Mr. Davidson. And perhaps Mr. Morton too, I don't know. My first question is about the seeps. And Mr. Morton's EIS also describes a spring with a permanent year-round outflow of groundwater located in the northeastern corner of the study lands. First of all, I know that I think it was in Mr. Davidson's report that was talking about the spring, I think, being, or one of the seeps being on land that has since been conveyed to the town. Which one of those seeps would be in that category?
Okay, so I probably will have to, again, refer back to John Morton, but I will say this. I think when John originally started his environmental impact study, there was a parcel of land that formed part of this property that is no longer part of the property. I believe it's been conveyed to the town. So that's why there may have been some discrepancy there. John, can you answer the rest of that question?
Yeah, Ron, you basically addressed it. One of the seeps that is in the northeast corner area that was originally part of my study area by the former landowner. Those lands have already been transferred over to the town, and I think that's the seep and spring area that you see in question.
Follow up on that. So the in the report, one of those 4 seeps is actually described as a spring. And it talks about the fact that from the spring, there's a permanent flow water course. My question now is maybe for Mr. Davidson. When I looked at figure number 8 of the EIS, the permanent flow water course from that, I think it's the spring, seems to run right through the area on the site plan where the apartment building A, I think it's A, in block 15 is planned to be located. And so I wondered about the permanent outflow and how that would be dealt with if the apartment building is located right on top of that, and what effect that may have upon the stability of the proposed construction in that part of the development.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I think you're maybe giving me more credit than what I deserve. I can't answer that, but I'm not sure if this is best for John Morton or for John Slocum.
I would just add in, Ron, the site plan does show where the existing water course is there. And Councillor Grace is correct. Some of the buildings at that block and the parking lot do occur on the existing water course. I turn it over to John Slocum. He can address that as part of the stormwater and the design of dealing and transferring that surface water over.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the area in question is in the northeasterly corner of the property. There are two features that are shown on the overall development plan, I suppose you'd say. There's a water course coming in from the north, which is an outlet from one of the outlets from the Summerside Stormwater Management Pond to the north. There are 3 outlets to that facility, and this is the smallest of the 3. It's a 300 millimeter diameter outlet that provides water to this water course, maintaining a flow to it. The spring, I believe, also is in that same corner. Feeds to that same water course that crosses the site on the angle. The Conservation Authority has reviewed this area, and they've commented that it would be permitted to pick up that water course and to pipe it across the site and to outlet that water at the downstream property limit. So however that may happen would be resolved, I would say, at the site plan application, but it could be piped, it could be a water course also. So there are a couple of options available, but the Conservation Authority ultimately would have an approval authority over that modification to the existing water course across that property.
Thank you. I just have one more question. And that is for Mr. Davidson again. So in your report on page 4 and 5, you say that you're talking about significant woodlands and stating about the Bruce County official plan and the PPS that the lands don't meet the significant woodland criteria under the provincial policy statement or the Bruce County official plan. And then you say, and also stated that these forested lands also likely don't meet the significant woodland criteria under the town's official plan. And my question is, since the environmental impact statement, which you referenced, was based on 2017 calculations that the size of the woodlands was 3.93 hectares, and that the size now is 4.2 hectares, which does meet the town's official plan standard. Would you say that this statement in your report is currently accurate?
So, yeah, thank you, Councillor Grace. Once again, though, I was taking information out of the environmental impact study. So that, as I indicated in the report, so that was coming out of John Morton's report. I think John will explain to you in a minute that he started off having a different opinion with the Conservation Authority in terms of did this or didn't this meet the criteria for significant woodland. Of course, and I say this with a great amount of respect, you're not going to win that argument with the Conservation Authority. So John, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he decided, well, okay, then we'll follow the Conservation Authority's idea there that it is a significant woodland. John, did I put words in your mouth?
No, you stated it correctly, Ron, and through you, Mr. Mayor. It's not shown on the site plan. You'd have to, I think Councillor Grace You talked about, you did have my figure number 8 that you were looking at earlier in EIS. It's, if you look at the very northeast corner, which is now part of the lands that have been conveyed to the town, there is a narrow strip of forest cover that runs to the north. That forest cover is probably about 15 or maybe about 20 meters wide, and then continues north till it goes to other woodlands further to the north. I looked at back in 2016 to 17 in conversation with the conservation authorities that those lands are on public property, and I don't know how long they're going to be there, whether there's other applications or whether the trees are going to be cut down, or what the plan was for those off-property forested area. So when I did my area calculation, I looked at, okay, if we assume that those narrow strip of trees were removed, then the forested lands that are on the subject property would no longer meet that requirement because they would be under 4 hectares. If you add in that very narrow strip of trees that are now on the county's property, that's when you get to the 4.2. So we're right on the limit, more or less, you can consider the 4 hectares. And the conservation authorities took the review and considered, no, we're going to go with the 4.2, and that remains with significant woodland. I accepted that, and that's where the amendment was come in, and that's what led to the revisions of the design and where we are today. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Then I saw Councilor Mayette put his hand up a minute ago. So Councilor Mayette, then we'll get the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 questions. The first one is for Mr. Davidson. Ron, you started off your presentation tonight, and it seems so long ago now, saying that this is the 3rd iteration of the application for this property. Could you just refresh my memory as to what were the R density numbers that you were seeking in all 3 of those applications?
Thank you. If memory serves me correct, it was a higher density count because slightly higher because we involved more single family dwellings. And I believe, and maybe I'll let Randy jump in here. I believe we had more apartment units. And through the mayor, if I may ask Randy to chime in.
Yeah.
Yes, happy to chime in here. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We originally had 20 single-family homes and 168 apartment units. Iteration number 2 had 20 single-family and 132 apartment units. So it was slightly lower than the current density. In removing the road, we've allowed those apartment blocks to become slightly larger, which allows it to become the 12 single-family and 150 you currently see.
Okay, I guess all 3 of those would have been in the R4 density zone anyway.
As far as the apartment blocks are concerned, yes, they would have all been R4.
All right, thanks for that clarification. And the second one, kind of building a little bit on where Councillor Grace was going with these seeps and these springs that make their way out the side of the hill. And so up the hill, we've got a fairly large neighborhood all the way out to Highway 21 and lots of single family homes up there. And many of them enjoy the ability to water their lawns in the summertime and take the pressure off our municipal water system by running sand points. And it seems to me that in order for you to feasibly construct what you're proposing, there's going to be a significant dewatering of the site taking place, and essentially running these drains and presumably the entire aquifer that feeds these sand points. We've seen this in other locations across the top of the old Algonquin shoreline, where developments down below and dewatering and drainage have an impact of drying up people's sand points. Have you done a hydrological study that would anyway infer or anyway imply the impact that it'll have on the people up the hill that that enjoy having spring water at their fingertips?
Somebody on the proponents team want to speak to that? Mr. Davidson?
Yeah, and again, I'll refer to John Slocum. I think I know the answer, but maybe John can add a bit more to it.
Sure, Mr. Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the short answer is no. A hydrogeological study hasn't been done, wasn't been requested, but yeah, it's pretty clear there's a high groundwater table on this property. It's below the bluff. The groundwater in this area is fed from the tablelands above the bluff. As we know, there's even a high water table above the bluff, and in a lot of locations along this feature. It's consistent throughout Port Elgin. We've seen it in numerous places, and activity below the bluff wouldn't affect the water coming down from above. The hydraulic gradient is coming from the tablelands above the hill, so we would be largely building up rather than draining from the bottom. The water would be coming from the top.
Okay, thanks for your opinion on that.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a number of questions. Some have been answered. I did have a question about the 4.2 hectares and then reduced to 3.9, now back up to 4.2. Good for the SPCA. I don't really see the town clearing out trees and making a whole lot of use out of that 0.3 of hectares. So I'm pleased to see that the 4.2 hectares it still falls within the significant woodland policy. So I get the definition now, the explanation. I wasn't clear on that coming into tonight, but now I am. And thank you, Councillor Matt, for the sandpoints. I've had a few people up above the hill ask about that, and I think there needs to be a hydrogeological study done on that property. But I'd like to suggest that should happen. And thank you, Councillor Carr. The transportation questions I have as well about a transportation study, and I think we should be doing it down in that area. That Geddes and Market and Harbor is an extremely busy corner intersection, and I think with 400 or 500 cars coming and going, it would only make that even more dangerous. So I'd like to see that happen as far as transportation goes. Transportation study is concerned. I was wondering about the developer's request for relief from section 2.6.82C of the town's significant woodlands policy, which includes tree preservation requirements. And this proposal removes up to, I believe, 65-70% of the treat forest. And I just, it's to the planner, Daniel, a special area 4 includes this parcel of land. And to the planner, Daniel, why would such relief make sense to you from a planning perspective? And how do you see the development, if approved, not impacting natural heritage on this parcel of land?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question. So I will also state that we're sort of at the stage of determining and making a recommendation. So I haven't formulated a recommendation yet on the significant woodland, but I can elaborate on what we would be looking for in terms of whether or not the proposal would sort of warrant a recommendation for approval. And typically that would involve conformity. If it's a local official plan amendment, it would have to conform to the upper tier official plan and provincial policies related to significant woodlands outlined in the PPS, so provincial policy statement. So those are the sort of two key documents that we would be looking for in terms of whether or not this specific official plan amendment makes sense. I will also note that the town has amended the 4-hectare policy twice in the past to create special policy area 4 in that woodland feature between Southampton and Port Elgin, and the other area is north of the Saugeen River. There's also a special policy area for that woodland feature as well. So that 4-hectare policy has been reviewed in the past and amended. So these are all things we'll sort of consider in coming back to council with a recommendation.
Every site's a little bit different, I guess, isn't it? So we can, we can talk about significant woodland in other areas, and I guess every site's a little different. Yeah. I just wondered about the seeps, and Councilor Grace has asked too, but I just want to hear it again. There was discussion about the seeps along the Glacier Bluff and not being fully recorded by the SVCA, and that was discussed. I read it in one of the reports, or the last meeting, I think I heard it at the open house. I guess my question is, are there more than 4 seeps along the Glacier Bluffs, and is this SVCA continuing the research and reporting, or have they fully completed the work and have the proponents fulfilled all the requirements of the SVCA? Can I just be clear on
that? Through you, Mr. Mayor, the question regarding the number of seeps is probably best addressed by Mr. Morton, but I can speak to the SVCA comments. And my general understanding is they appear to be okay with the proposed development concept, subject to confirming the number and location of seeps, and they feel that can be addressed as a condition of draft approval. So they're okay based on their comments with the development proposal as is, and are seeking clarification on the number of seeps.
Okay, that's fine. The stage 3, archaeological study that was discussed there. It seems like quite a while ago now that Ms. Mason spoke. That's something, Mr. Mayor, that Daniel is going to be required.
Leonard? We'll go to Daniel Kingsbury, and then we can go to you, Mr. Davidson.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, that determination is not made by planning staff. That is made by professional archaeologists, and there's a guidelines by the province that stipulate the type of archaeological assessment and when a stage 3 is triggered. So that process is well outlined by the province through specific regulations. And so we would not be making that determination.
Mr. Davidson, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do, and I'll keep this very short. So there was a comment made earlier that the archaeological assessment is outdated. That's not true. They never go stale, and we do have a sign off from the province. Having said that, SON, and I respect this, they don't necessarily agree with the manner in which some studies are done in Ontario. And they have requested that there be a new archaeological assessment done on site with SON's own archaeologist watching this. And they also want to potentially peer review some of the other documents. And on that note, Randy is meeting with SON on March 7th. He will be signing the agreement to basically says he's willing to pay for everything and do what's required of someone.
Okay, thanks.
Hopefully, Deputy Mayor or Vice Deputy Mayor that answers.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Davison. I appreciate your response. Mr. Davis, you went to great lengths last week, and again tonight talk about affordable housing. I think everyone knows where my heart lies, and this council has been extremely supportive of affordable housing, and I just had a few questions about that. You mentioned about a $295,000 for 1-bedroom condo. What's the square footage of that 1 bedroom?
If I may ask, refer that to Randy, please.
Sure.
Yeah, so those 1-bedroom units will be approximately 700 square feet.
Randy, do you have a plan on paper that shows that?
We do, through you, Mr. Mayor, I apologize. We do have some preliminary plans drawn up, some architectural plans. Nothing's been really finalized yet, as it is really up to what gets approved or not approved before we decide to go ahead and actually design something final.
Hey, Randy, could you send council? I haven't seen that. I don't think it's been sent out to us, but could I Could we receive a copy of what you have so far with square footage for those 1, 2, 3 bedroom?
We can send some concept plans out for sure.
I wouldn't mind seeing the concept. 295 for 700 square foot, 1 bedroom, you're deeming as affordable. What's the price of the 2 bedroom and square footage, and what's the price of the 3 bedroom and square footage?
See, Mr. Nodwell has his hand up. Maybe he wants to speak to it. Mr. Nodwell.
Certainly, thank you. We're still working on the pricing schedule for that. Again, we didn't want to put the cart before the horse without knowing exactly what was going to be approved.
When will you have that information?
When you approve it.
So you'll determine the square footage of the 2 and 3 bedroom when if and when we approve it.
They're going to be, the footprint is already laid out, as you can see on the drawings there, and we'll work within the parameters that are outlined there.
Good, thank you, Brett. Appreciate that.
Certainly, thank you.
Second, Mr. Mayor, I had about 8 or 10 questions, but I think most of them have been, just give me 1 sec, sorry.
No problem.
Yep, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions or comments from members of council? Well, the deputy mayor, yep.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I've been thinking about this all night. First off, I want to thank everybody who has come on tonight to talk both for and against our planners. Thank you for the work you put into it. The residents of the area for your thoughts. Council does not take this lightly. We're, as you see, there's lots of questions that we have. One of the things I would like to see is a ring of trees around the area that separates the area of Lord Elgin Estates from the new section, and a ring of trees that separates Nodwell Park from the new development. That way there is a little more tree retention, there is a little more privacy. As Mr. Robertson said, it's tough, but when owner has plans for the land, it is their land, and we really can't stop it as long as they follow the bylaws and procedures that are laid out for them. But what council can do is we can help minimize any damaging effects and make it more acceptable to everybody. We want to make sure that the developers are getting what they want, and the local residents see that they can live with what it is that we're trying to develop. At no time does this council ever want to do something that is against the goodwill of Saugeen Shores, of the development of the Saugeen Shores for the people of Saugeen Shores. One comment was made tonight about the schools. Well, Saugeen Shores is the fastest growing area, and as a result, our schools are at 100% capacity right now. Doesn't matter whether it's this development or any development, the students are in a precarious position right now until our Board of Education decides what to do and how to expand in Saugeen Shores. So we can't really stop a development saying that that's up to the Board of Education. I'd like to see a little tone down. 2 or 3 story, 4-story apartments is just a little too much for this area. And I really don't think 1 bedroom apartments are an answer either. I like the 2 or 3 idea, but I look forward to working with our planners as they come back to us. I do believe we do need that hydrogeologic study because it is wet. I don't want to see anybody losing any of the groundwater that is down there. And as was said before, this area was developed at one time. The trees in there, the cedars that are along Market Street aren't old forest growth. That's new forest. They're scrub. We can fix that up. But I do want to see, when we do plan this out, that there is adequate tree coverage, maybe even a tree buffer. And that's all I'd like to say, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions, comments? Councilor Dubinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll throw this out. Whoever can answer, please do. We have talked about this, the traffic impact study. It was done some time ago. How long ago was the traffic impact study done in this area?
Yeah, the supervisor, development services.
Yeah, our transportation master plan, which took into consideration these lands as developed, potential development lands, was just completed. It was adopted, I think, received by council rather last year in 21, being implemented over time. And the counts that were done, I'll have to refer to the master plan, we'll get you a more fulsome answer, was over the previous 2 years. So 19 and 20 with the receiving it in 21.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Jay, when were these traffic impact studies done during those years? Was it the summer months? Was it spring, fall?
Well, as I said, we'll have to come back with that fulsome sort of response. I'm not sure. I participated at arm's length from that process, so I'll have to do my digging and get you that response. It's quite clear. It's important, and I want to make sure I don't misspeak right now.
Mr. Mayor, I would just comment that it is very important. We heard virtually every delegation talk about the traffic that will be down there and the traffic impact it will have. Also, Mr. Mayor, as far as the affordable units go, I think that's the wrong way to go, but that's just me, and we'll be talking further about that. But I look forward to further discussion on this and further reports down the line, up-to-date reports. Thank you.
Further comments then, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. First and foremost, I would like to just say I really appreciated the layout of this evening's report. Mr. Kingsbury did a great job of summarizing the themes of the concerns, and there were what I'll call buckets and sort of repetitive from the numerous pieces of correspondence that we've received over the last week, and in particular today. I think those were captured quite well, and what I'll reiterate from many of my colleagues around the table is that I agree with the sentiments that a number of reports are still required, a number of information is still required. I require some of the follow-ups to feel comfortable proceeding in any way, and in particular, an updated environmental impact study, some clarity on the traffic and transportation study, hydrogeological study, and further information on the archaeological study. So there's a lot of work still to be done, and I'm sure, Mr. Mayor, you'll summarize to that effect as well. And I just want to extend my appreciation for those who spoke this evening, understanding that this is a sensitive topic that extends far beyond my tenure on this council, and I look forward to the continued discussion.
Thank you. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
One follow-up I've written down, Mr. I missed, and that was the ingress and regress. I'm just wondering if, the transportation study, and I'm hoping that will happen, and I think I like to hear comments from our emergency services, particularly fire. I like to know about ingress and regress. I think there's one entranceway there. I think that's what it reads, if I'm reading it correctly. And I just want to make sure that our fire department has made comment or will be making comment, and I'm sure they will be during the transportation study process. So I just want to mention ingress and regress. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's quite clear that this traffic issue is one that council requires a great deal more information on. And so I think our staff has heard all of your input on that, and is going to come back to us with that information. Are there any other comments? I'm just going to sort of summarize some of the things that I've heard from council and make a couple of comments of my own. An important one, a critical one, from my perspective, is the sign off of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We are working to improve our relationship with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and this is a critical site. It's a very sensitive site, and so I want to make certain that the work that needs to be done is done to ensure there is no cultural or archaeological significance of this site that will be damaged or disturbed by new development, or where there might be potential that those areas are avoided. So that's a critical component. I was very pleased to hear Mr. Davidson speak to the work that's the developer's doing. And one bottom line for me is going to be to hear from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation that they're comfortable with what's being proposed here. I did want to speak to the education issue that was raised by one of the speakers. I just wanted to note, because it's important, I think, for context, that every municipality in the county of Bruce is receiving these letters from Blue Water about every development that's happening. The Blue Water Board has now a standard letter, I think, that they're sending out warning just about every development that there may not be schooling in the future. That's not just in Saugeen Shores. I've seen it for developments in Kincardine and across the county. So that isn't specific to this development, and it isn't even specific to this municipality. And that comes with its own set of concerns, I understand. And of course, this council's been working with the board to try to address that, but I thought that was important context. There was some comments about the hydrogeological impacts of what's proposed. And I think that some further investigation into that or some further clarification would be warranted. We certainly have heard an awful lot from residents in the past years about wells going, or I shouldn't say wells, but sand points going dry, or the other extreme excess water coming over the escarpment and impacting houses below the escarpment. We've gotten a lot of feedback about that over the years. We certainly don't want that to be exacerbated. And I think reassurance for this council on that line of thinking is important. And then I guess this is a comment, a couple of comments, I guess, one on affordable housing, and this is really critical. I've heard, we sort of have, over the course of this discussion today, sort of dismissed affordable housing or said that affordable housing isn't going to happen here. I really can't accept that. I think we've been very clear. I just not going to vote for new developments that don't include affordable housing. And this is a pretty significant development. It's got to have affordable housing. It's got to be truly affordable. And in my view, we got to have rental units. I'm not sure why there can't be rental units. There should be. And I think the developer should bring us some affordability here. And it should be true affordability. And that to me is a bottom line. It's a bottom line. It's not, I'm not targeting this developer. That is my bottom line for every development that comes before this council everywhere going forward. There must be affordable housing or at least attainable housing in this development. And from my perspective, that must include some rental opportunities for rentals, or if they're going to scale down the density, secondary suites, things that we've approved in the past. But I think they have to come back to us with something to show us some affordability. And that's true for every developer proposing projects in this municipality. And finally, and I'll come to you, Mr. McDonald, after I've finished, but finally on the question of woodlands and significant woodlands and residential. So I think, it's important to note that, as has been stated, and it's true, this piece of property has been designated residential since the mid-1980s, and it's been zoned planned development for some time as well. So several public processes have taken place over most of my lifetime. And in each of those processes, the public and councils, several councils, probably 10 councils going back through time at least, have reaffirmed that this piece of property ought to be available for residential development in one form or another. At the same time, the public has also said through those processes that there's a piece of forest on this property that is significant. And they didn't identify this particular property, but they said pieces of property with forested areas of this magnitude ought to be deemed significant. The forest ought to be deemed significant. The woodland ought to be deemed significant. So there's a balance that has to be struck there in terms of the residential component and the woodland component, right? We have to, the public and previous councils have said residential development should be allowed in this location. They've also said the forest here is important. And so I think we have to find a way to, allow some type of development to proceed in a way that preserves the integrity of that woodland. And I guess the question is, have we achieved that balance? Special Policy Area 4 was raised. That's the area between Port Elgin and Southampton, lots of woodland in there and lots of development has happened in there. And we certainly approved that. But it's also important to remember that the piece of property, the bean or bush, as it were, between that this is connected to and to the north of Port Elgin, in that bush, lots of houses got built, but also 80 hectares of forest was donated to the municipality. and is or is about to be in municipal hands, protected permanently. So there's a balance for you, a certain, fair bit of development, but also a fair bit of preserved woodland. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we need to look for in developments like this. I think development can be acceptable, but a fair bit of this woodland needs to be preserved. And I really think the developer ought to go back and look at what they've proposed here and decide whether or not what they're offering up here is appropriately respects the significant woodland in this location, and whether if potentially they might be overdoing it a bit in terms of what they're offering and how much of this woodland they're taking out, recognizing that in other areas where we have seen development in significant woodlands, very large portions of that woodland have been turned over and permanently preserved. So I think that's something that the developer ought to consider before coming back to council. It's clearly a significant concern from the public. And I would hazard to guess it's a significant concern of this council as well. So that's food for thought for the developer and some things to come back with. And Mr. Nodwell, you had a comment you want to make?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Right from day one, our goal has been to work with the municipality to offer what the public wants and what the public needs. And we've been told consistently that density was what it was. The only people that are really pushing to say that this isn't going to be offering affordable units are those outside of our team. I was pressuring Jay to get me some numbers today in offering what affordability looked like, what attainability looked like, and it's our primary focus right from the get-go. As we redesigned it from iterations that we talked about, iteration 1 and 2, we really looked at how do we maintain that green space? How do we incorporate a trail that really doesn't exist into a trail that the entire municipality can enjoy and appreciate, taking that walkway from Geddes and Market right up to the park. And as you can imagine, Nodwell Park has some significance to me. So it's one of those things where we really want to make this a neighborhood that people are going to love. And we've been really working hard with the municipality right from day one to ensure that traffic was looked at, and it was well in advance, that the seeps were dealt with, and we've been working hand in hand with the Conservation Authority, that our archaeological team had done things 14 years ago to ensure that this was not going to have an archaeological find, and registered that with the ministry 14 years ago. So a lot of this stuff that came up tonight has been taken into consideration, and we really do want to work with our neighbors as much as they're not going to believe me as I say that. But this is someplace, we're in the area. It's not like we're just coming in and parachuting in and hit and run and leaving. May 21st, 2019, we actually received applause from the council, and that meant a lot to us that we worked with you guys to ensure that our Spence Street development met the affordability criteria that you were looking for, and we made the changes that you guys asked for. We came back, and we're going to do the same thing with this, and I just want to let you know that.
Yes, thank you. And I would say council certainly does not doubt your sincerity, Mr. Nodwell, and we don't doubt the sincerity of anybody who's spoken to us this evening, and appreciate the tenor of respect that everyone has had as part of this conversation this evening. I think, anyway, we've put forward the council's made its comments and made some suggestions, and so now the matter will go back with the developer and with the planner, and we'll get the answers to those questions and a recommendation from the planner in the future. I'm not sure exactly when, but maybe Daniel, before we conclude this portion of the meeting, you could just state for the public if they have further comments that they'd like to make, where they can send those comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we do have an email address that comments can be sent to. It is bcplpe@brucecounty.on.ca. applicant.ca. A bit of a random email address. So I would also encourage, if people are having trouble finding that, they can just Google Bruce County planning applications and select Saugeen Shores. And on that page, they'll see all the applications currently in Saugeen Shores, including this one, and they will be able to find the contact information there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, with that, we will move on in the agenda then. That ends that meeting. We'll move on then to reports, and we have 2 reports. And the first one is 6.2.1, a staff report on the plan, the Bruce discussion paper and supervisor development services.
I don't think I have anything specific to point out in the report. It's fairly short, I think, and you can see what's there, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. There is a recommendation that council endorse this report as comments on the plan, the Bruce business discussion paper. Are there any comments or questions from members? I guess just for a little clarity for my sake, since I not only am considering this, but will also receive the comments on the other end, I wonder, in terms of the, you make comments about housing there and that you wanted to see more reference or context around housing in the report. And of course, Bruce County has an entire discussion paper as part of this focused on housing. And I just wonder, could you be a little more specific for me about what you want to see, what you think ought to be in the business discussion paper that isn't there?
Yeah, if I may. I mean, to me, it's related more to the concept that it's part of an economic program of the county. And so an economic really is sort of what we value about our community. And so I think we've made it clear throughout tonight, but also many other meetings, that housing is one of the top priorities. And so I think, and even the business paper does that, but it doesn't get reflected, in my view, in the recommendations, which is the paper talks about having a strong economy, including a well-balanced housing system of construction, availability, different modes of housing. But then the recommendations sort of leave housing as either an afterthought, which would be a critical comment of the report. But also, I think it has an opportunity to say, well, why don't we strengthen that component in the recommendations so that decisions related to businesses also include consideration for how that either affects or supports or supplements housing related matters. And I think that just was what I was intending with that statement.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Councilor Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'd like where you took this discussion, it's spurred me on to ask a question as well. So the list in the report, Jay, it talks about economic development as a key objective, economic development strategy, and the land supply. I presume this is not a comprehensive list, that there are other priorities in the plan of Bruce that are equally important, things like environmental stewardship and quality of life and development of recreational amenities and things like that are all in there as well, right?
You'll recall that there are several plan of Bruce discussion papers, of which this is one. So there's the housing one, there's the natural heritage one, there's an agriculture one, there's about, 8 of them. So so this is one of a whole host of similar reports.
Right, I recall now. Yes, thank you.
If there's nothing further on this, then you've heard the recommendation, and I'll ask all in favor. That's carried. All right, then we're on to the second and final one. Whoops, I just closed the. So 6.2.2, an information report on Ontario's Housing Affordability Task Force, and Supervisor.
Yes, this one I would like to have just a brief comment, is that I'm really trying to reflect, this was certainly a report from the province's housing task force, but it's a report outlining what I think is coming down the pipe. We don't know how it's going to be implemented clearly. These are just recommendations. The provincial government has to decide what to do with them. So I was trying to just contextualize it and say, well, what you can expect, how it might differ from what our preferred approach is, how we might need to be considerate or deliberate a little differently, even in the near term, because the understanding is that some of these recommendations may be looked at before the provincial election even. And and be implemented. We just don't know when or what the implementation will look like.
Okay. No, it's just for your information. So are there any questions, the Vice Deputy Mayor and then Councilor Grace?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank Jay for this report, and I think the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force report, if you haven't read it, it's a really solid report, and I like how Jay summarized it about the Affordability Task Force identifies insufficient housing supply, and he talks about require greater density, and there was another line. He talked about in his report the rewarding municipalities who are being active and progressive in terms of adding density and paying close attention to housing needs for affordability in their community. And I just wanted to pat ourselves on the back a little bit with the density question. I think we've made some really solid changes. We've gone from three stories to 6 stories for high density developments in this community. That's in response to what developers were asking for. We've done that 2 blocks either side of Goderich. And I think that when we talk about the 170 units in behind Holiday Inn Express, we've talked about a few weeks ago. I know Barry's Construction have got a plan of, a red line plan in Woodbridge County for 210, apartment units just north of the retirement lodge. So, that's 380 units that are in the works. And I understand from Jay, maybe there's others that developers are talking about at least. So, this council is really working hard, and I just want the community to know that we've made some really good changes, and I hope we continue to make really solid changes from a housing perspective. But one of the things in the task force the province announced here was that reward municipalities that are working hard to make positive changes for affordable, high density housing in your community, and take money away from those that aren't. And so, I really like what we're doing, Jay, and I just want to tip my hat to you and Cibrel's doing a really good job, our new housing coordinator. And I just think that 2022, there's going to be some good stuff happening. So thanks, Jay, for all your good work on the housing front. You are working really hard on it, and we're going to win this battle. So thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jay, for the summary. I have a question first, and then a couple of comments on the report myself. So in the section 3, which is entitled "Limit Public Consultation and Reduce Processing Timelines," it refers to requiring a pre-consultation with relevant stakeholders where the municipality sets out a binding list of required documents. So I wondered if you could give us an example of, like a practical example of how that might work in terms of relationship with developers or other stakeholders.
Okay, so if I may, I guess the question is how it might work. Well, I can't say, again, emphasizing that we don't know how the province intends to implement that recommendation, but I can say what we do now, we pre-consult now on files, and it depends a bit on the file type, scale, scope, location. But like if, for example, we would meet with our development partners in planning, or review partners in planning, so the Saugeen Valley Conservation, it would be Bruce County Planning, ourselves. We would meet with a proponent, and we would meet and discuss how to submit a full application. It would include the submission requirements like a planning report, a stormwater management report, an EIS if it was needed, depending on, again, scale, context, etc. And the proponent would go away, prepare that material, and submit the application to begin the process. So that's what the pre-consultation means and what it means today.
Thank you. So I just have some comments, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, I'm, as we all are, very concerned about affordable housing. And I know that increasing the supply of available housing is an important part of that formula. for success. One of the things that I'd like us to see move along in that was mentioned in this report is converting underutilized commercial properties. I think that there's some potential there to increase rental space. But I am concerned by some aspects of the report. And I hope, and I believe that the town, that Jay and staff that you've already identified this in some of your comments. Some examples of what I'm concerned about, that the province set uniform standards for urban design to prevent the preservation of neighborhood character from standing in the way of new housing. Also recommending prohibiting the use of heritage designation to stop or slow residential development. The proposal to establish province-wide zoning standards, including minimum lot sizes, maximum building setbacks, eliminating parking requirements. And the report recommends preventing the abusive process by parties that appeal on purpose to deter new construction or municipalities that refuse applications to avoid legislative responsibility, and encouraging adjudicators to prioritize projects that support growth and intensification. So as I said, I'm glad that the town intends, it appears to me from your report that you intend to advocate so that changes fit our needs and our what our town needs, not just in terms of affordable housing, but other issues like accessibility and true affordability, not just availability of housing. And I also want us to keep some things in mind, for instance, for our tourist economy. It's really important, in my opinion, that we preserve our neighborhood character and the character of our towns and our wards. Maintaining that character and the heritage buildings. There was just a recent article in the Star talking about how wonderful our town is to tourists, and one of the features praised was our small town character. So I really, I know that that's important to our staff as well, and I just want to state that it's important. But I also want to talk about, for instance, parking. I mean, parking is really important to us. Imposing a province-wide standard in our town would be a mistake, because people in our town need cars. We don't have public transportation. So maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but we need to maintain some parking requirements, given our lack of public transportation, given the amount of snow we have and the winter parking restrictions that we have on our streets to keep things easy for our snow removal crews. We need to take that into consideration. I'm also very concerned about the prospect of limiting public consultation. It's a core democratic value, as we have been debating nationwide over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and most recently this weekend. But I think I got the impression from this report that there was a tendency to paint public consultation with the brush of NIMBYism. And I don't think that all public consultation, or people who may have concerns about a particular development, that it's fair to put them into that category. And one of the comments that they're talking about is the abuse of process, and is an appeal labeling an appeal abusive process. I'm not sure how the province intends to go about determining the motives of an appellant. Is it just because the lawsuit is opposed to new construction? What if that new construction is proposed for an environmentally sensitive area that has nothing to do with NIMBYism? So those are my concerns, and thank you for listening to them.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, and I certainly take all that you've said. I think it's important to note that you have a task force report here to affect any of this will require amendments to the Planning Act or to the provincial policy statement or both. And I think that with the municipality is going to have a good opportunity when and if those proposals come forward through legislation to make comments along those lines. I certainly agree with much of what you said, Councillor Grace, and I agree with what's in the report as well. There's good aspects from our perspective and some not so good aspects from our perspective in this report. And I think as the province seeks to enact them, we should be paying close attention and making our voice heard one way or the other, depending on what our interest is. So, Jay, I assume that you will, along with the rest of us, be watching how that progresses at the province and coming back to council. And I certainly encourage you to come back to council as those changes appear and seek our input and assess whether or not the municipality wants to make comments to the province in certain areas. One thing I would say, and just not a small thing, I think a big thing, and drifting a little off what Councillor Grace just said, this NIMBYism, this labeling that we're doing, I think we should stop doing it. I mean, I really think we should scrub that terminology from future reports. You know, you can see, and Councillor Grace referenced it, you see the damage that's done by name calling and labeling people, and you know, that it marginalizes their opinion and diminishes it, and just leads them to be angry, and then leads you into a fight. And you can see that none of that does you any good. I mean, just because somebody has a different point of view doesn't mean the point of view isn't justified. I mean, that's where our dialogue needs to be. You know, not calling people names, but hearing their point of view, expressing yours. If the municipality, you know, I don't like being called names, and I think our constituents probably don't like it much either. So I think we should certainly not use that language anymore, and I hope the province would stop doing it as well. All right, that's the end of rant. Is there any other comments or questions? If not, then thanks for that report, Jay. Good work, and to Cibriel as well. We appreciate her work on this. So that brings us to the end of the planning meeting, and I have a resolution that this planning meeting of February 22nd, 2022 hereby adjourns at 9:21 p.m. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor Smith. All in favor? That's carried. We stand adjourned.